two most beautiful words in the Constitution, maybe in the English language, are due process. It's due process that protects our rights and our freedoms from the arbitrary power of government officers who might be completely convinced of the righteousness of what they're doing, but they might not care about your rights, and they might not care about your freedoms, and they might be wrong about the facts. One of my colleagues said when we got into this debate last time to me, well, wait, you're not saying you support due process for guilty people, are you? And that's the whole point. We don't know if they're guilty until there's been due process. So yes, we've got to have due process for everyone. That's what the Constitution talks about. In our first colloquy about the first bill this morning, Mr. Chairman, we heard members saying that due process was just too excruciatingly prolonged and protracted when we were talking about a case where a guy kicked a dog, spent 3 days in jail, and then was deported from the country. And yet again, we hear from the distinguished gentleman from Texas that due process just takes too long. It just goes on for too long. Look, this bill is a frontal strike on due process. When you think of the government officials who are going to be wielding this lawless power, don't think of the leaders that you love and know the most, the ones who are inviting you to dinner. Think of the ones you loathe and fear the most, because those are the ones you will be empowering also to designate people at whim as terrorists and as drug traffickers. And these wild accusations have led to devastating consequences. Take the case of Jose Reyes Barrios, a 36-year-old professional soccer player and coach who was an asylum seeker from Venezuela, awaiting his asylum hearing. Unbeknownst to his family, he was swept up and flown out of the country to that famous torture prison in El Salvador as part of the government's dragnet campaign against Tren de Aragua. He had no criminal record. He had no criminal charges, but he was sent to the mercy of a brutal dictator in El Salvador simply because he's got a tattoo on his right arm, which was mistakenly associated with Tren de Aragua. In fact, the tattoo is of a soccer ball topped with a crown, which signifies the soccer club Real Madrid. He had no legal process. He had no judge. He had no jury. He had no right to counsel. He had no opportunity to present evidence or to hear the charges against him. He had no opportunity to cross-examine. He had no due process. Look at one other case, Andre Hernandez Romero, a gay makeup artist and barber who fled Venezuela's brutal Maduro regime, which was persecuting him for being anti-gay and for speaking up for free speech in Venezuela. He'd passed his credible fear interview in our asylum process. His asylum claim was pending when he was swept up in the government's campaign because of his benign tattoos of two crowns, one symbolizing his beloved father, one symbolizing his beloved mother. And that became the basis for his removal with a unilateral administrative power to declare somebody somehow at odds with the government. Romero missed his asylum hearing because he was at the torture prison in Salvador. 60 Minutes reviewed his media posts going back for more than a decade and could not find a shred of evidence linking him to a gang activity, and yet he was described as a gang member. To this day, the government has never brought forward any evidence. He's had no constitutional due process whatsoever. And our friend from Texas wants to make this the law. He wants to make this official that the government can declare anybody a gangbanger or a terrorist without any legal process at all and kick him out of the country. Come on. This is the Judiciary Committee of the United States House of Representatives. How can we be pushing this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wish Democrats had been as worried about gangs over the last administration as they are about a gang definition in this bill. Because of Democrat policies, Tren de Aragua has an established presence from coast to coast in our country. Nearly every single day, we hear stories about the terror wrought by these heinous criminals. In August, ICE arrested a Tren de Aragua member with an active warrant in Bogota, where he was sentenced to 7 years for trafficking and possessing illegal firearms. He had been caught and released at the border during the Biden-Harris administration. In May, ICE arrested multiple Tren de Aragua members who were involved in a mass shooting at a Chicago house party last December, and these arrests are not limited to Tren de Aragua members. Earlier this year, ICE arrested a gang member from El Salvador with U.S. convictions for sexual indecency with a child, failure to register as a sex offender, illegal reentry, and illegal entry. ICE also arrested an MS-13 gang member with a homicide conviction and a Sureños 13 gang member with 6 convictions for drug possession, 3 convictions for resisting arrest, 2 convictions for domestic violence, and 2 convictions for assault. These are the crimes that are the obvious result of Democrats' open border policies, so today it's no surprise that they'd rather attempt to poke holes in a clear definition rather than own up to their past mistake. The definition of criminal gang here is straightforward. It clearly delineates the requirements to be considered a gang, and it closely tracks another gang definition already in statute, the definition of a criminal street gang in 18 U.S. Code 521. Federal immigration officials shouldn't have to wait for an illegal alien gang member to harm, kill, rape, or terrorize an American citizen before expediting the removal of that dangerous foreign national. This is a common sense provision that creates safer streets for every American and closes a gaping loophole in current law. But if we want to talk about how these determinations are often being made, we hear rhetoric about gang tattoos. Let's look at this gang tattoo here. 666 on the forehead of an illegal alien, Antonio Israel Lazo Quintanilla. I simply do not want an illegal alien with 666 tattooed on his forehead in my country, and I don't think that most Americans would disagree with me there. As we've talked about earlier, this law does comport with due process. There are opportunities for illegal aliens to appeal decisions, deportation decisions, but if Democrats would like to explain why this illegal alien with 666 tattooed on his forehead should be given free rein in the interior of our country, they are welcome to. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.